What's up everybody, welcome back to A Day in Charleston behind the scenes. Today we're going to be talking about this hyperlapse. That hyperlapse you just saw actually took me 3 tries to get it perfect, and what I'm going to do now is walk you through first and second tries, what I did wrong on them, what I learned from them, and finally what I did right on the 3rd try, and a little bit about the post-processing to make that hyperlapse that you just saw. My original idea was to do a hyperlapse moving through the entire outdoor portion of the city market. Now, if you're not familiar with what a hyperlapse is, it's basically a time lapse but with movement in it. So a regular time lapse, you have your camera on a tripod, it's taking photos, it's not moving. With a hyperlapse, you're taking a step, taking a photo, taking another step, taking another photo, taking a step, and taking another photo. And that's the basics of it. I've got another video where I go into more depth about how to shoot those, but that's the basics. So this is the first attempt. There were 3 main issues with why this first attempt did not work out. The first was when I was doing it, I was taking 2 steps and taking a photo. And I was doing that because it's a longer distance and I didn't want to have to take 1,000 photos and have to post-process all of them. I wanted to only have to post-process fewer frames. The reason it didn't work out is because in this environment, everything's so tight in here, there wasn't enough data that was the same in each frame after each other for the Warp Stabiliser, which I'll get into later when I talk about the post-processing, to pick up on. If you're familiar with hyperlapses, you know what I'm talking about when I talk about Warp Stabiliser. So I think if I'd done shorter steps, it would have been better, and that's what I did later on. The second reason, the focus point I chose, every hyperlapse is moving to or away or around one subject, and you keep that subject in the same part of your viewfinder for every photo. So this one, I chose the center of the market, and that isn't a very set point. There are people walking in front of it. It's not the same in every frame. And so again, the Warp Stabiliser didn't know what to pick up on, and that's why it's all jumbled. The third reason it was tough, we're outdoors here, and the light's very bright. I was shooting it during the daytime, and then inside the market over here, it's pretty dark. So I shot it in aperture priority mode on the GH5, and as I'm moving out, the exposure's changing a lot, and that made it hard to even that out in LR time-lapse. So let's talk about the second attempt at shooting this hyperlapse. As you can see, we're back inside, and I did a couple things differently from the first attempt after seeing how it came out to try and fix those things. First, we're inside. I don't have to worry about the exposure changing in aperture priority mode. I can lock it into manual mode, and it's going to be a lot quicker for me to post-process it. Second, now we're in a shorter area because this inside portion of the market is shorter, so I'm going to have to take shorter steps. So this is the result of the second attempt. So as you can see, that one was better, but still not quite stable enough for what I was hoping to achieve. The biggest takeaway from that one was that I needed to try focusing on a single actual point the whole time and not just an arbitrary point down at the end of the middle of the tunnel. And what I focused on is the city of Charleston sign, and you'll see that in the next hyperlapse. So as you can see, that one was much better. It was much smoother, and I was really happy with how it came out. The biggest takeaways were really keeping that single point on the same place in your viewfinder the whole time versus just having an arbitrary one down the center of your camera. And also, in this shorter space, it forced me to take shorter steps, and what I learned from that is that when you're taking shorter steps, the photos are more similar, and there's more data that's the same in each of them, and the Warp Stabiliser then works better, making it a really smooth hyperlapse. Taking shorter steps means you're taking more photos, and it might take a little longer to process, but you can always speed those up. You can never slow it down. So I always try to err on the side now of taking more photos, taking shorter steps. Those are the biggest takeaways. I'll talk a little bit about the post-processing on that last one, and I'll show you what the Warp Stabiliser is now. Alright, so we're back in the studio. Let's talk about post-processing. The first step is editing the photos, and I used LR time-lapse to do that. Let's get into it. I'm not going to get too in-depth with how to edit photos using LR time-lapse. This is just a quick overview that this is a part of my process, and these are the settings that I use to shoot the hyperlapse. Alright, so this is the LR time-lapse file that I used to edit the photos. You can see my shutter speed is 1/100th of a second, and I used a f5 aperture, 500 ISO. I didn't really want any motion blur in this, but I still want everything to be in focus. Those are the settings I used. You can see the interval actually jumps around a lot, and that's because I would wait for someone to not be right in front of the camera and take the shot. The interval doesn't matter so much because we're not shooting outdoors. You're not going to see jumps in the sky or in the lighting really much. With that said, there are some jumps in the exposure, and that is because the light shines in a little more in certain places in the market. You can see it's a little brighter there, darker, brighter. So it did jump around a lot, and that's why I used LR Timelapse to smooth it out. Now that the photos are edited, we need to stabilize the hyperlapse. For that, we use After Effects Warp Stabiliser. That's what I was talking about earlier, and I'll show you that right now. This is the After Effects project file I used to stabilize the hyperlapse. Now the first step is bringing in the photos. If you haven't done that before, you go to Import, File, and you find your sequence. Just click on the first image in that sequence, and then click Open. Now I've already brought the files in already, so I'm just gonna go Cancel, but you can see it brings all your raw adjustments in, and you click OK, it'll bring it in for you. That gives you this file here, and what you want to do is drag that down to make a new composition. I've done that already, here it is. It's going to automatically make a composition that's the size of your file, which as you can see up here is a bit bigger than 4K. The next step is to add a Warp Stabiliser to that file. You really just go up to your Effects, Distort, Warp Stabiliser VFX. And the only things you're going to want to change, you're going to want to check Preserve Scale, and you're going to want to change this to Stabilize Only. Otherwise, it'll stretch your image out a little bit and you'll lose some of the data, you'll lose some of the crispness. Now what I do after that, and this is a choice, you don't have to do this, is I go to Composition Settings and I make the composition bigger than it started out with. Remember that first start was about 4,600 pixels. I've added about 1,000 pixels either way, and that's so there's room around the edges. I'll show you what the Warp Stabiliser looks like without any cropping. You can see the edges are kind of jumping around here. It's finding one point in the photo, the point that we focused on, and smoothing out everything around that. So the photos are a little bit off center here and there, and it stabilizes that out by moving the photo around. So I create this extra room around it, export it, so that when I bring it into Final Cut Pro, and this is the final hyperlapse, I've actually cropped in to 124%, so then you don't see the edges anymore. So that's the whole process from start to finish. I hope you learned something. I'm certainly learning as I do these videos along the way. Definitely leave me a comment down below about how I can make these videos better and more educational for you guys. If you want to see more of them, subscribe. I'll be doing some of these every week. This is Matt Coda, signing off.